Before we go into that active bit, here a bit of an outline of the agenda. So we're in the middle of the welcome and introduction, but then we're already going into our first part, which is a scene setting presentation by Josephina Lindblom on how to reach higher sustainability performance of buildings with the help of levels. So we have a 10-minute presentation by Josephina, setting the scene, framing the second part of today's webinar, which is 3 consecutive presentations from 3 great speakers that are joining us today. And they are actually looking into concrete examples on how a number of these important certification schemes on the EU market can link or use levels. Be aware that we're not really looking at all the certifications schemes out there on the market, but these ones specifically and how they link to levels. After the 3 presentations, we have, as mentioned, time for questions and answers from you as the audience. So please keep them coming while we have the presentations. Now, before we go into the first presentations, we do have a poll question for you. And just in case you're encountering any troubles, please use the chat and send a message to the event's email address. So also, if you have troubles accessing the poll, which you can by getting out your phone and scanning the QR code that you see in front of you on your screen. We always give a bit of time for participants to do that. So please get out the phone and scan this QR code with your device, and then you are going to be redirected to slido.com, which is, as most of you are probably aware, a simple polling tool. Again, colleagues have also put in the chat some messages in case you find difficulties in technical difficulties where you can reach out and also how you can link to Slido. I would assume that the majority of you have been able to connect to Slido, which means that we can open the poll, which is a very easy one because we like to understand how familiar you are with levels. So this is the question, and you have multiple choice options, which means that you can choose more than one of the answer options. I can read them to you, but you should also be seeing them on your device. In principle, the question is, or the answer option is, I participated in the testing phase. I'm looking into how to apply it, or I'm applying it right now. I've attended previous levels events. I have looked at the manuals. I have looked at the website. I received the newsletter. I'm a member of the LinkedIn page. But of course, also you can answer, I am completely new to levels, and we invite participants to be new to levels because we're always wanting to enlarge the circles of levels aficionados. And last but not least, I have checked out the e-learning or the CAT. I've seen answer options or answers are coming in, which is great. So we'll just keep it open a little longer because I see that not everybody has yet had a chance to answer the poll questions. Again, you have more than one answer option because we are very much aware that you might have had interaction with more than one of these options. Looks like there is quite a front runner with the website. That's great. So that seems to be an entry point for information. Followed by levels events, so these kind of webinars, but also conferences. And then we have the newsletter and the manuals. Also, the LinkedIn page receives quite some confirmation from participants that this is interesting and useful as a resource. There are also a few newcomers to levels. Great, we love to see you. We also will have, as I said, a scene setting presentation, so you'll get a bit of an introduction into levels before we then move on into the specific examples of certification schemes and how they link to levels. No, good, thanks. Thank you very much. I think we can close the poll now. And I see a lot of familiarity from participants, at least of where they were already looking for information and how they stay up to date with developments on levels. This is also a great link to our very first presentation, which we're going to have by Josephina Lindblom, the Policy Officer for Sustainable Buildings at DG Environment. Josephina, this is, again, I think a good sign. There are people that have already had some experience with levels, not everybody, but quite a few. They know where to find information if they want, but I'm sure they're still very much looking forward to your scene setting presentation on how we can actually reach higher sustainability performance of buildings with levels. So Josephina, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, I don't know if I'm more happy about seeing people coming back who have been with us before, or that there are so many who are new to levels. It's great to see this combination. It's really, really nice. So welcome to all of you. Could I have the next slide, please? Because I'm going to introduce you to levels before we get to sort of the core of this webinar, which is then listening to different certification schemes representatives. But just to give you an overview of what levels actually is then. It is a common language, which we have been working on together with the sector to develop and to test. We ran work from almost 6 years, and levels was adopted in 2020. So since then, it is out there to be used. We based levels on best practice industry standards as much as possible, so to not reinvent the wheel when good things were already existing. We made sure to make levels suitable for both residential buildings and offices. With that, we cover, of course, most of our building stock. And we've also made sure that the indicators that I'm going to come to in a little bit are really suitable not only for new buildings, but also for renovation projects. From the very beginning, we knew, when we set out, we knew that we wanted to provide a tool, a methodology, this common language, which would work really well for those who start their journey on understanding the sustainability performance of their buildings, so that no major experience in life cycle analysis or something like that would be needed. It is really an entry-level tool where you want to learn about how your different decisions that you take along a building project have an impact on the building's sustainability performance. So it's really, I want to stress that it is an entry-level tool to be used for the mainstream market. Next one, please. So again, coming back to the fact that levels has been developed to be a common language. I just mentioned what I tried to represent here in the blue part, that levels can be used to assess the sustainability performance of your building, regardless if you intend to certify your building project or if you are requested by policy or something like that. If you are interested in understanding how decisions have an impact on this, you can choose the levels indicators that you want to work with, that interest you, and go ahead with those. But we have also seen, since levels was published, I should say, in 2020, that it has worked as a really good basis for bringing in life cycle thinking and circularity into different policy measures, in particular EU policy measures. So currently, for example, you may be aware of that there is an ongoing revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. There, for the first time, we are bringing in life cycle thinking, and we are doing that with the help of levels indicators. You may also be aware of that the Commission is working on the development or further development on sustainable finance taxonomy. There is already a delegated act in relation to this when it comes to climate change, but we are now developing yet another delegated act, which is more linked to circularity and zero pollution. I'm not going to go into the technicalities of what this means, but just to say that in both those cases, we are using the levels indicators to bring in, again, circularity and life cycle thinking into the taxonomy. So if you're used to working with the levels indicators, you will find it fairly easy, I think, to then conform with the taxonomy criteria as they will be adopted later on this year. But we also see a third area where levels functions as a common language, and that is in certification and green public procurement criteria. And that is what we will hear more about today, in particular the certification aspect, because we see how several of the larger certification schemes operating on the EU market have, first of all, been very much involved in the development and testing of levels. They were really key to that process, but now also how they are aligning themselves with certain parts of the levels framework, let's say. So really, remember that levels is a common language that impacts different parts of the market. Next one, please. So what does levels actually cover? It covers 6 different areas. We call them 6 macro objectives, but they are really areas in which we have our indicators. So we have the whole life carbon. So that means how much energy and how much are you using and what carbon emissions does that result in throughout the full life cycle of the building. We have resource efficient material flows. We have the efficient use of water. So these are all linked to some kind of environment impact in the end. But we also have 3 areas which are more linked to the quality and the value of the building. So health and comfort, adaptation and resilience to climate change, and life cycle cost and value. Next one, please. So in those 6 macro objectives, these are the ones that you see listed here in the second column, actually. They are the ones that I just mentioned from the previous slide. You will see to the right then that we have different numbers of indicators. I'm not going to go through them here now, but you can find more about them on our website, for example, to get a good overview of what they actually mean. But just to show you that we have indicators in these different 6 macro objectives. Next one, please. So the different levels indicators then can be used at 3 different levels. So the first level, you work with the indicators in a qualitative way. That is happening at the concept stage. It really serves then as a very good way of focusing the conversation between the investors and the design team. So to decide what are the key sustainability objectives for this project. And then typically levels provides you with a set of checklists actually to go through. Level 2 is where you start to work with the indicators in a quantitative way. So that is at a design and construction stage then. And level 3, then you look at not just the design performance, but the actual performance. So that's at the point of handover to the client. And also in some cases, some of the indicators, it is about monitoring the performance over typically the first year of its use. So those are the 3 different levels in which you work with the indicators. And I want to remind you of that at the previous set that I mentioned, you choose the indicators that you want to work with. If you pick up levels in a voluntary way, so to say, you're not forced by legislation, for example. You choose which ones you are interested in, and you choose the level you want to work with as well. Next one, please. So we have a very good website. Many of you had already been there. I hope that that you found it useful. We have a step-by-step introduction. We have the e-learning and calculator, which I will mention a little bit more about. And we have the real backbone, the spine of levels, which are the user manuals, which goes into very much detail in how to work with levels. You find all of that and more, I should say, on the website. And the next one, please. So the e-learning and calculator, I just wanted to highlight them a little bit. This is what you can find at the website. The e-learning material has been developed by Arup and is a really good introduction to get the explanation about the principles and concepts of levels. We have it in several different languages, so I think you will really enjoy that if you're interested in understanding a bit more about what levels is than what I have time to tell you now in a couple of minutes. The calculation and assessment tool is also available from the website, and that is for those who are ready to use levels in a project. This tool helps you to structure your real assessment and the calculations. It helps with that. The next one, please. So the key benefits of levels then is to I want to stress that it is a common language, which is based on the best practice industry standards. It looks at the whole life cycle of the building, and the way that it also looks at the final real performance brings accountability and investor confidence. We know from those who have used levels that they believe that it really enhances the dialogue between the different stakeholders, and it supports their skills and understanding in this area. And as I mentioned before, it has already started to underpin future EU, but also national policies, and in particular in the area of whole life carbon, where it supports future-proofing of our buildings for carbon neutrality. So levels is for you, regardless of if you're working in design and execution, or in planning, policymaking, or in financing. All of those and others have been involved in the development and the testing of levels. And with that, I think I'll hand over to Katarina again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josefina, for giving us this first introduction, but also especially for showing us where we can find more information that we're not able to share in this very short introduction presentation. So we invite, of course, everybody to visit these resources and find out more. Before we go into the second part, which you already see announced on the slide here, we have one more poll question for you, because we're moving into this very bit on certification of buildings in the next part. And before that, we would want you to answer one more question. So please go back to Slido, or if you still have it open, then great, because it's simply following up on the question that we had before. So the question is, have you been involved in certification of buildings? You have a single choice answer here, so please use one of the answer options. And if you've not connected yet to the Slido, do get your phone out and scan the QR code, or go to the chat and follow the link. Now, the answer options to have you been involved in certification of buildings are, I'm considering it, I've occasionally done it on a regular basis, or I've done it at almost all of my or our projects. You have to choose one of the options. This time you don't get multiple. And maybe we can already start looking into the answers that are coming in. Yes, quite a number of people have already answered. That's great. And the majority is definitely considering it. So it's still in the deliberation phase, which is great, because then today's webinar can definitely give you inspiration on where to start and how to possibly apply. There is also a large share of the audience that have already used or have already been working with certification of buildings on a regular basis, or occasionally, or even on almost all of their projects. So great. I think this is a really good basis. There's curiosity or already experience in the audience, which is great as a kickoff for our second part of this webinar. So at this moment, I would like to close the poll, but thanks to everybody that has answered this question. We're now moving into the second part, which I already introduced at the beginning when presenting the agenda, to give you more details on how specific examples of certification schemes have linked to levels, how they have used it. And we're going to have the 3 presentations consecutively, so one after the other. And only after that, we are going to go into a Q&A. So during the presentations, please put your questions in the chat. Please also mention which speaker you like to specifically answer your question, so that we can group them later on and get as many questions as we can in the time that we have to our speakers. The very first one is Dr. Anna Brauner, who is the Head of Research and Development of the German Sustainable Buildings Council. And Anna, you're going to give the first presentation on how you integrated levels in your organization's certification system. Please, Anna, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So in order to not lose any time, because I'm really curious for the questions and the session later on, I would like to move on. My name is Anna Braune. I'm based in Stuttgart, and I'm off your disposal later on. So I Next slide, please. I would like to talk about levels and the DGNB system. DGNB system is a scheme that has been released in 2008 at its first version. And at that time, next slide, please, we said that there's three fundamental aspects that we want to sort of put on the market. People have to understand that the life cycle perspective when designing and renovating buildings, designing new or renovating buildings is essential. So life cycle assessment, whether it's environmental or economic, is one of the core aspects of the DGNB system. Secondly, we have the holistic perspective. So we really look at environmental, social, and economic aspects. And third part of our DGNB or of the DGNB system is that we are focusing on the performance and not so much on the measure. So we are rather defining benchmarks and target values and a method how to sort of provide evidence that good performance has been provided instead of sort of ticking boxes or describing the way. Next slide, please. In 2018, we released a new version of our DGNB certification scheme for new construction, and 2018, in 2017, the beta version of levels was introduced. And since in January 2018, we had some weeks to integrate levels beta version into the DGNB system at that time, and we did it. Even though it was the beta version, it really was very important for us, because with this we have introduced some new aspects into the scheme, but also introduced the reporting aspect of having a certificate and not only the information whether it's silver, gold, or platinum certified, but also the relevant information on specific common European indicators. Next slide, please. Since we have not been sort of redesigning the whole DGNB system, but we rather integrated the levels indicators into the system, you see that it is quite a mixture of where the indicators of levels get into the criteria of the DGNB system. So please don't get confused, but we really did a very thoroughly analysis and assessments and decided where the levels indicators were best placed in the DGNB system. So, but at the end, we really made sure that everything was included. Next slide, please. Since the DGNB system is can be applied throughout different levels, throughout different stages of a life cycle of a building, from the planning over construction, in the operation, renovation, again operation, and the end of life, we had to sort of integrate the level thinking that Josefina just presented to you into the different schemes as well. So for example, level 3, the one that is focusing on the operation, is has been sort of integrated into the DGNB scheme for buildings in use, in operation, and levels 1 and 2 have been rather implemented in the new construction and renovation scheme. So, but there's sometimes a little bit of a mixture, because in our new construction and renovation scheme, we also prepare sustainable operations. So there's also some aspects of level 3 included. So, but this is, I think, very important that we think of this, that we all are aware that it's not just the design, but it's not the fulfillment or the building of fulfilling the building process, but it's also the continuous improvement process when you want to achieve our common objectives, sustainability objectives. Yeah. And on the next slide, you can see what we did an analysis on a quantitative basis. This was one of the outcomes of a project we did together with 7 other green building councils in Europe, where we all worked on integrating levels better into the schemes and providing trainings and so on. And we did this very quantitative analysis on how the system levels framework is integrated into the DGNB system. And for Neubau on the left side, new construction, in the middle it's renovation, and buildings in use is on the right side. You can see there's we really wanted to show also that it is integrated, and in buildings in use, I think we know what to do. We will have a next release coming soon, and then there will be higher conformity as well. On the next slide, I want to showcase a little bit on how important is the levels, methods that are applied in the DGNB system. So is it just a part or is it a lot? And what we did is that we assumed for the criteria that are relevant from a levels perspective, moderate or good performance. And what you can see is that if you only come with, I would say, if you would come with a new building that provides a levels compliant reporting, and the building is an moderate, okay building, you already get, oh no, I think it's a good building, you already get half of the points in the DGNB scheme. And next, please. But if you would continue, of course, that's an average value. On the next slide, then you can see that we also provide an option to report according to levels. For the time being now, it's an Excel export, but since we have aligned the levels indicators and the DGNB scheme, and levels report is supported a lot by applying the DGNB system. And on the next slide, we have also showcased that our latest development, it's an example where we really want to show that it's important to have a common language. We developed a building resource passport and released it in February. And this building resource passport, it's in German for the time being now, is very much aligned with the levels framework. So it is a different format of reporting resource relevant questions to a building. And on the next slide, I have also a little showcase on our, I would say it's an offer. We call it ESG verification for the EU taxonomy, since the DGNB scheme is very well aligned with levels, and levels is based. Levels gives the basis for aspects of the EU taxonomy for buildings. We have generated also an offer that verification of the taxonomy criteria can be supported by us and by DGNB certification as well. And then on the last slide, I have just the question, so why should I certify if levels can be used? Levels is our common language, but our certification schemes are the ones that really help in the planning and optimization, because benchmarks can be used. And that a transparent quality control can take place. So somebody from external looks at the values, looks at the performance, and that you get a real good sort of answer from an external perspective. And of course, it can be used as marketing tool. And with this, I am on my last slide. I'm not a graphic designer, but when you think of our computers maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe you recognize. So for us, levels is inside DGNB system, and it only provides, it is very helpful for paving and explaining how that in this way we can achieve our common objectives in Europe. And I thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for that presentation on how levels and the DGNB scheme are working and interacting with each other. So thanks. We're moving straight into the second presentation, but of course also later, if there are questions for Anna, we will be able to take them in the Q&A. Our next speaker is Letitia Nosek, who is Program Manager at the Dutch Green Building Council. So here again, another perspective from another EU member state on how levels can complement that certification scheme. Letitia, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Katharina, and nice to be here today. So my name is Letitia Nosek. I work at the Dutch Green Building Council and mostly on the LCA parts. But today I'm gonna talk with you about BREEAM and levels, because if you go to the next slide, you can see that in the Netherlands we have BREEAM NL. And the Dutch Green Building Council is the NGO that develops the scheme, especially for the Netherlands. So to make a Dutch translation on BREEAM, which is worldwide, but we made it especially for the Netherlands to make it compliant to the Dutch market and to Dutch practice and legislation, and really to push the whole construction side towards more sustainable practice. And if you go to the next slide, you can see which different certification schemes we have at the moment. So we have one for the area. So you can really certify a whole area. We have one for new builds, and we have one for in-use. And the new build at the moment is mostly focused on utility. And in a couple of months, we are also releasing one for homes. And that said, these last three are really compliant also to levels. And really on the building as well. We started in 2009 with BREEAM NL in the Netherlands, so that's 14 years. We've learned a lot, but we have also certified a lot. If you go to the next slide, you can see an overview on total certified square meters. We have 36 million square meters in the Netherlands certified at the moment. You can also see that the usage of BREEAM has increased quite a bit, especially for the in-use certification schemes. And that is due to the fact that a lot of investors are using our schemes to certify entire portfolios. Well, if the line will go up like this, that is a good thing for sustainable construction. Because also the numbers are quite high. If you look at the right, the average score for BREEAM in use and new build is a bit more higher. You can see that the numbers are pretty high, which means that those buildings are on average, like on a benchmark level, higher than legislation. So this is like a short overview of of BREEAM. But that's not what I wanted to talk to you about, because levels and BREEAM, if you go to the next slide, please, is very compliant with each other. I don't have all these errors that Anna had, but if you look at the mid and the right side, you see all the different objectives of BREEAM as well, and then you see that all the macro objectives of levels complement with this. So if you look at the first one, greenhouse gas emissions, that's materials and energy. Resource efficiencies also in materials. Well, water is water, health is health. Well, and so you see that like all the different macro objectives are also in BREEAM. And the same as Anna, we also did an in-depth study on the different indicators that are in levels and are in BREEAM as well. And those are pretty compliant with a few deviations. We are working on those. And if you go to the next slide, you see that we have a deviation in life cycle costing, more on the design variations and the way we report this. We don't have a BREEAM for interior and finishings, so that's also not possible with BREEAM, and that is due to our national environmental database. We cannot show global warming potential that is like really specific on the different life cycle stages in BREEAM, but we are also working on that with our ministry. So hopefully that will be checked off next year. And for us, it's really important to be able to say that we are levels compliant, because we see the need for harmonization in Europe, and the need for a common language. And I think the countries with a certification scheme that have been around for a couple of years see a lot of recognizable indicators within the levels framework. And we believe it's a really good thing that that harmonization can now also be done with other countries who are not maybe totally familiar yet with certification schemes. And to give you an example on how you can use BREEAM and levels and see the benefits of this framework and certifications, I also took two examples. If you go to the next slide, on how different macro objectives and indicators are used in the market. For instance, this one is Biocentrum. It's a knowledge center for bio-based products for construction, and they really took BREEAM and especially health as an important objective. And the BREEAM NL experts took the certification scheme as a starting point. And what you saw there is that all different aspects came out pretty well. So it is a really nice, healthy building to be in. It uses low energy, low exploitation costs. So they really also took a look at, what is best on a whole life cycle perspective, and how can we implement all different indicators in this building. What is also beneficial of this is that by using this way of integral thinking, they could implement all these different benefits into one building. So that's yeah, really nice. And they really have a high health score of 92% in BREEAM, and that's yeah, pretty good. We also have another example. If you go to the next slide, that one is of Aliander Duiven, and this one has been built in 2015, so quite a while ago. But because they use BREEAM as well, you see that they were quite innovative for that time. So they were the first building with a material passport. They really looked at material usage. They really looked at the energy cost as well. Yeah, I think this is a really great example of why integrated methodology could be really beneficial also for the entire market, and levels is a great way to get that line of thinking also in the whole building sector in general. Yeah, and I see Katarina also coming back, so I think my time is up, but I think those were also the main things I wanted to tell you today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Letitia, and also for trying to stick to the time there. Again, if there are questions to Letitia, we will have a chance later to pick some of them up. So please put them in the chat. We have a third presentation from our panel today by Alphonse Ventura, who's an architect and a part of the technical team in the Green Buildings Council in Spain. So Alphonse, we hear from you a third perspective on how the Verde rating tool can relate to levels. Alphonse, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you. So Verde is a sustainability rating system developed entirely by the Green Building Council Spain around 15 years ago, and has been operating successfully in the Spanish market since then. As well as the levels framework, Verde is rooted in a life cycle analysis mindset, and each of Verde's criteria is evaluated in the life cycle phases where it has an impact. And there is a validated calculation methodology to do so. Next, please. In addition, each criterion is weighted according to a number of parameters, such as the duration of the effect, its intensity, data reliability, or local relevance, among others. Next, please. So here you can see the matrix connecting the standardized impacts considered in Verde to life cycle analysis phases from the European norm. In the degree of intensity of the color shows the weight of the impact, okay, in each phase. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. So Green Building Council Spain has always been attentive to what is happening in this field of sustainability and building sustainability, updating itself every time the EPBD, the Energy Performance Building Directive, raises the bar of our building code, for example, with the near zero energy building definition and so on. And in the same sense, some time ago included an alignment report with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. As part of this philosophy of a constantly updated and living tool, Verde participated also in the levels evaluation phase. And once the first version of levels has been released, Verde has been adapted to be mostly aligned with levels criterion and indicators. First of all, we assess which of the levels indicators were already fully aligned with one or several Verde's previous existing criteria, partially aligned with one or several Verde's previous existing criteria, for example, aligned with an indicator, but not using exactly the same units. And in that cases, we looked for the missing data and changed it to the same units. And those which were not aligned with any Verde's previous existing criteria. And in most of these cases, we added new Verde's criteria aligning with levels. And then we have finally adapted our existing or added new minimum benchmarks and baselines to new or adapted indicators. Next, please. Yeah, the picture shows those in dark blue, which are fully adapted, and the others in light blue, which are related to a levels indicator, but not fully adapted literally. The 5 new criteria in Verde to align with levels are marked in light orange and are sustainable drainage, aligned with levels 5.3, thermal comfort scenarios, resilience to climate change, design for adaptability, and life cycle costs. Next, please. Our tool offers a report on levels alignment customized for each project. And there we show the levels macro objectives and indicators and which criteria of Verde aligns with it. And yeah, if the checklist has been done, for example, in level 1, or if in level 2 we include numerical indicators and we show which degree has been reached. Next, please. This is the whole alignment report. Okay. At the moment, we haven't implemented level 3 in Verde because we haven't any rating tool focused on existing buildings. Okay, but we are working on that. Next, please. So we have received a very positive feedback on the adaptation of Verde to levels. On one hand, the public administrations welcomes the fact that the levels framework comes from the EU institutions, European institutions, and not from a private for-profit organization such as GBCI or BRE. And that will facilitate the adoption of sustainable criteria in public procurement policies for building construction, at least in our country. In fact, this is already happening across the European Union with the next generation funds, which are based on taxonomy criteria, as Josefina mentioned before, which in turn is rooted in levels. On the other hand, the private sector appreciates the standardization of common methodologies and indicators that will be shared by levels aligned rating tools. This will allow better and easier comparisons of the sustainability of real assets while keeping each country's specific patterns, which is a feature much appreciated by investors. For example, when buying a car, someone can choose between different brands, but almost all of us appreciate that the steering wheel or pedals are in the same place and working in a similar way. We have presented our new beta version of Verde, almost fully aligned with levels to the accredited evaluators of Verde during a webinar, which raised a lot of interest and was very positively received. There are also already some ongoing evaluations using the new adapted tool, and some of them will take part in the More Life to Levels project, which will help us having a deep test of levels implementation and of our adaptation to the framework. And well, that's more or less the main ideas I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alphonse, for this presentation on the Spanish way of looking at the integration of levels. We now have time to take some questions. I would also like to encourage our other two speakers, Leticia and Anna, to turn the cameras on again, so we have the panel with us for these questions. Maybe as an opener, a question to the three of you in turn, and I would love for you all three to answer that particular one, because I think it's the core of today's webinar. So why do you think certification schemes care to align themselves with levels? So, I mean, obviously speaking from your own perspective, but why do you think this is interesting and relevant for certification schemes to align with levels? Should we maybe start with Anna, also in the order of the presentations? What's your view in a couple of sentences, Sony?
Yeah. So why are we aligning? Actually, we all are Europe. And we all have to support the objectives that secure safety and a livable continent. And these objectives are defined by levels. It's climate neutrality, it's resources security, it's climate resilience. And we don't have any time to lose in discussing the fundamentals of methods, e.g. how to calculate specific indicators. And as GBCs, we can work on benchmarks and set, intermediate targets, but the objectives, like the final targets, they are so clearly defined, and now we really have to speed up. And yeah, even if we have slight different views on details, like Leticia maybe said that, calculation rules are different, but at the end we are all following and have to support the same targets. And that's why levels is very, very important, and is also in line then with, what the scientists tell us, what would be best for humans to act differently now.
Thanks, Anna. Leticia, what's your take? A short reflection on why is it interesting to align with levels as a certification scheme?
Oh, I totally agree with Anna. I think it's really good to have a common language, but also not discuss on what you're going to measure anymore, because we don't have the time and we need to push forward. And from that perspective, I think it's really good to also be able to share best practices across countries as well, to really push the market forward quicker, because then you can learn from each other, and otherwise you'll be in your own country having your own view on certain things, and that just slows down the whole process. For us, we are very happy that we are aligning with levels, because we give benchmarks based on the Netherlands, on the Dutch market, on what is possible there. Well, Alphonse and Anna are doing the same thing, so you will have different projects, but the base is the same, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, the commonality aspect. Yeah, thank you, Leticia. Alphonse, what's your take on why it could be interesting and important to align?
Yeah, Anna, Leticia have already explained very, very well, and having a common language help us pushing the sustainability forward, and that's our main goal as green building councils. And the market appreciates that kind of standardization, and and it makes it easier to share also experiences, and keeping the specific way of doing of each country, of course.
Oh, yeah, very good. Yeah, and I mean, it is an internal market in the end, right, across Europe. So definitely, I see that. Okay, maybe Alphonse, just picking up one of the questions from the chat, which obviously relates to what you've presented in relation to Verde. So we understood that Verde will soon be revised to fully integrate the levels indicator. What is the timeline for that integration?
Yeah, in fact, we have already a pilot version, or which is already running, and the first projects coming from the first movers are already being tested with this tool already aligned with levels. And well, we hope the first projects are ready at the end of this year, and then the first works completed probably at the end of 2024.
Good. So that's a relatively close time frame then. So good luck also with that effort. Letizia, there's also a question in the chat around life cycle costing and how that relates to BREEAM. Could you confirm that BREEAM uses life cycle costing, which would then be the indicator levels indicator 6.1, and should it not be seen as one or the other? So maybe shed us some light on that if you wish.
Okay. Well, we do have life cycle costing in BREEAM. It's in the management part, but it's pretty basic. So we are implementing it in the revisions of BREEAM. We do that every couple of years in the new schemes to make it more levels compliant. But that's like, we have to wait until we can revise. We go to the revision cycles. But it is included, yes.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And Anna, there's also a question on your presentation in the chat, which is on the relative importance of the levels indicators. So you gave an example where it seemed that the GNB system aligns with many, if not all, of the levels indicator. But is there one indicator where you would say it's particularly relevant in the work that you are doing?
Yes, it's actually two. It's the LCA, of course, like the embodied and operational carbon. It's life cycle costing, and it's the it's the substances perspective. It's risk and hazardous substances that has a high weighting, and resources. They all actually this was the outcome. Actually, the levels indicators. I mean, that's the macro objectives, and of course, maybe one point I'm missing with levels is from an environmental perspective is that we're not talking about biodiversity, and I'm pretty sure that the next version of levels will include it. But from an environmental perspective and resources perspective, the most relevant aspects have been chosen, and this is reflected in our schemes that these are the questions that we are giving a lot of points to as well. So it's, I think, well chosen, except biodiversity.
But there's always room for improvement, right? Otherwise, we would stand still on the spot that we are. So absolutely fair point there, Anna. And I want to thank the three of you. There were more questions in the chat. We will, of course, collect them and also use them to the framing of future webinars around levels, even though we're not able to answer all of them today. So, but thanks for you three to present us these interesting examples. You have been answering a request that came back in previous webinars where it was about this link of certification schemes and levels, which we hope to have addressed today in more detail, thanks to the three of you, of course. So thanks so much for this. Thanks, of course, also to participants for the questions. We are now coming to the closing of the event, and for that, I would like to turn the attention of our audience back to Josefina, who has, of course, been with us the whole time and has a couple of more points to raise to our audience. Your closing remarks, Josefina, please.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, as Katarina just said, there's been a lot of questions in previous webinars about how levels links to certification schemes, and that is why we put together this webinar. And I hope you feel that you got good information about what are the links and what are not necessarily the links. I have answered to a couple of your questions in the chat. I didn't want to take too much time from actually focusing on the presentations here, but please rest assured that there's more information on our website, of course, but I hope that I've been able to follow up on the main questions in any case. By now, I would like you to please ask you to take a minute to provide feedback in the survey that our colleagues would put in the chat now. We always have that at the end of the webinar, and we really take your feedback seriously. For example, today's webinar was indeed a direct reaction to questions and comments that we've had before. So we really follow up on what you put in there. Another topic actually that comes up very often in conversations and in reactions from participants is, what about renovation? And therefore, our next webinar, already on the 18th of April, will be exactly on renovation, levels and renovation. And there is already a link available for registering to that, which I believe our colleagues will also put in the chat here. So be aware of this event and spread the information to your networks, because this promises to be a really interesting webinar as well, where we will also hear about real building projects applying levels in renovation projects. So not only do we look very carefully at what you provide in your survey afterwards, but we also look in great detail to what you express when you register, what you expect from this webinar. This webinar was about certification and levels specifically, but there were other topics that you had mentioned as well, which we, for good reasons, did not cover today. Apart from renovation, which many of you put in, where you will have the opportunity then on the 18th of April to learn more. We could also see how some of you were asking about more direct information about whole life carbon and levels. I want to stress that we had a webinar on this last year, end of last year, and our colleagues now will put the link to that webinar because it was recorded, so you can access it. So we had a webinar on that. So if you're interested in whole life carbon, be aware of that we had a webinar on that, and you can access it. We also have a fact sheet on that, actually, on the Levels website, if you're interested. There were also many of you who wanted to know, as expressed at the time of registration, about the link to taxonomy, and that came up in the chat here as well, actually. I mentioned that Levels is used as a basis for the development of the taxonomy criteria, as it is in other policy measures as well. Once we have adopted the taxonomy criteria, we will have a webinar, a Levels webinar on this. But we have actually been waiting to have it. The criteria were supposed to have been adopted already, but they haven't been for different reasons. So we are waiting to have this webinar because we want to have it once we know exactly what it will look like, so that we are putting out the right message. But this will come, rest assured. Also, several of you at point of registration expressed the wish to learn more about building projects having used Levels and share their experience. We always try to include something on this in the webinars. It didn't really fit in today as we talked about certification, but we've had it before when we talked about whole life carbon in the previous webinar, for example, and we will have it the next webinar on renovation. But I want to let you know that more specifically, we will have a live project, a so-called live project, which will kick off later in spring. And this live project will see 10 different building projects using Levels and report back to the Commission in great detail about how that work unfolds, so that we then can use it to prepare case studies for everyone to dive into. It is a fairly long project because building projects take time, as you know, but we will make sure that you as a general audience, as a Levels network, will be able to follow the progress of this live project. So we will come back to you with more information on that. I'm sure we will be able to use webinars, but also fact sheets in the newsletter, etc. We will be providing you more information. So having said all that, and setting the scene a bit for the future as well, I encourage you to visit our website to see the introduction, to link to the Levels LinkedIn group, find out more about our fact sheets and other kind of information. And with that, I'm done. Thank you so much for having joined us today, and I give back to Katarina.
Thank you so much, Josefina, for these encouraging words and also for outlining activities that are still on the horizon where you get an opportunity to join us. So for me, I have the honor to close this event with a big thank you again to all of our speakers who've done a fantastic job today, but also you as our participants who put forward these insightful questions that again will not be lost even if they've not been answered today, because they will help frame us future events as well. Big thank you to the colleagues of the Levels team in the background who have done, as usual, a great job for a smooth running in the run-up to the event, but also during today's session. And then I sincerely hope that the webinar has fulfilled your expectations and that we see you in future events in the future. And do not forget, as Josefina has mentioned, to join the LinkedIn group if you have not already done so. So thank you very much for this event today, for your participation, and we wish you a lovely Tuesday and rest of the day. See you soon and goodbye.